I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Siegel.
Welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
It's good to see you all. Oh, I'm sorry, John. Let me just start really quickly. It's good to see you all. We've been meeting here every week, and we tend to drop our shows on Friday afternoon to talk about the ways in which Trump has been showing evidence of cognitive decline, what we call early onset dementia. And we're talking about him having gone through an intense week where he was convicted on 34 counts, 34 felony counts, had a very angry so-called press conference Friday morning. And then over the weekend, he had what John will describe as a long interview on Fox and Friends Saturday edition, which John will explain to you if you experience it as if you're a Fox viewer or a Trump supporter. It felt like a triumph. Can you tell us more, John?
You know, it really is interesting to see the different perspective from what we call Earth One and Earth Two. From Earth One, people were making fun of his Fox interview. It was shambling and rambling. But we actually watched the whole hour and a half, which was torture. So you're welcome for our service. But when you really watch the whole thing, you realize when he's in the right atmosphere, it was daytime, to pick up on Harry's recurrent point that he's better in the daytime. So they're learning to schedule him for things in the day. You see the golf carts. It's like a sunny day. You see the golf carts driving by because he's obviously there in his own comfort zone at Bedminster. As Harry likes to point out, they brought the B team. This was the weekend Fox and Friends. So these people are much more less news oriented and more kind of entertainment oriented. And they were very sycophantic, as we will talk about.
Yes, they're younger. They're not as experienced. And I think that Trump deliberately chose the B team because lately Steve Doocy has surprised people by actually asking tough questions. And there was no way, right? There's no way this group was going to ask a tough question, and they did.
In this entire hour and a half, there was not one tough question. In fact, I wouldn't even call them softballs. I'd call them cupcake questions because it's sort of like, here's some frosting. Just lick the front. It's so sweet. You're so great. And actually, it's actually showing us what journalism could actually degenerate into. This is what journalism must look like in North Korea. You know, where they say, "Oh, you're legendary, sir," and they start talking about how great he is before they ask the question. So it's a worshipful, kind of salon. And in this kind of environment, this is where Trump feels comfortable, where he's being worshipped, where he's being complimented. Okay, and so he is relaxed, he's charming, he's funny, and yes, he even gets confused, but it doesn't seem to matter. And one of the reasons it doesn't matter is because of the way the journalists respond. He says nutty things and they laugh. He says things that are clearly lies and they go, I know. So this is important because how can a crazy man's crazy views take over the most advanced society in the history of the world? Well, he's got these other people who help create the stagecraft. And so if you watch this interview, you start to see how someone could go through the rabbit hole and see this interview and see everything upside down.
Let's see the first clip.
You wouldn't have an electric car mandate, which is one of the great jokes of all time. And I think everybody should have an electric car if they want one, but they should be able to buy other forms of propulsion.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to point out, as I do on a weekly basis, Trump can't go through a week without committing a phonemic paraphasia. Okay, which is a hard, concrete, reliable sign of organic brain damage. Just saying, I just want to keep pointing it out so we don't forget it. It's not a joke. It's not something for, Comedy Central. It's a serious sign of organic decline. That's all I wanted to say.
Propulsion is not a word. He substituted.
Propulsion is not a word, right? Yeah. Do not try to use that in Scrabble. You will not succeed. All right, well, the other thing I want to say before we start the second clip is one of the things that we talked about in our last show, Harry, where we looked at his angry press conference, as you call it, is how his paranoia animates his flock. right? He creates these paranoid scenarios that are not true. And then basically says, I'm the one who will protect you from this invading horde of immigrants or these other outrages. Well, here we have two examples of his creating a false threat. And actually, Harry, I think you mentioned one of our viewers wrote to us and said, well, actually, he doesn't make these things out of whole cloth. There are articles examples where a lot of things where it happened once to one person and it was written about, and then he goes and generalizes it and says, this is a general trend in society. And the people who hear it believe him. So let's hear a couple of the existential crises that are facing America today.
And so many other things. I mean, like you go into New York, the kids can't have Little League games anymore. It sounds so trivial, right?
Why?
Because the migrants are living in the fields. They have all tents, unless you want to play around the tents. It's a little bit tough. It's a little bit tough to play. But no, I mean, but when you think of like common sense, who really thinks that men should be playing in women's sports, right? It's you know, something I mention all the time, gets one of the biggest applause, but who, you know, where does the mind come from? Right. A man playing, look at the weightlifting records. I mean, these weightlifting, guys that never lifted anything before, they're breaking the records by numbers that are like unthinkable against women that are the top women, they're the strongest, they're getting blown away. Who would think? The swimming records, the track records, it's crazy. It's just crazy. I actually, when I first heard about it, you know, what was it, like 6, 7, 8 years ago, right? When I first heard about it, I actually thought they were kidding. I thought, you know, this was just a funny joke. But they're actually serious about it. They're actually committed to it.
Okay, so, just very briefly, the person who wrote into me pointed out that there was an article that on Randall's Island, which is an island off of Manhattan, where there are sports fields. In fact, in my high school when I was growing up, we used to go to Randall's Island, that there were some migrants camping there. So Trump hears this one thing and then says, you can't play Little League anywhere anymore because the hordes of people are taking over the fields. Last week, we also mentioned that he said that there was someone with a machete in a McDonald's. It turns out there was someone with a machete outside of McDonald's. So Trump reads this one little clip, and now suddenly it's an invasion of criminals who are going to chop you to pieces with your machete. This is how it works. Remember, he doesn't read very much. He's not disciplined, and he's also suffering cognitive decline. So now if he reads a bit, he can just take that and explode it into an invasion. And the same thing is true with trans people in athletics. How many is it, John? Like 11 people?
It's a minute amount. It's a minute amount. And I just want to tell an anecdote about that I was in a social situation and someone who we know was a Trump supporter was actually warned in advance, please don't talk about politics. But she couldn't help herself. And she said, I just feel so sorry for the girls. What do you mean? The high school athletes, they're all giving up. All the female athletes are just giving up because they can't compete against the trans athletes. I just don't think that's fair. They're giving up. It's like, and we were trying to convince her it wasn't true. And finally I said, can I just Google it? And I Googled, like you said, there's something like, you know, a dozen trans athletes in high school sports right now, maybe 20, but it's certainly, and I did find, again, Harry, one example of a girl swimmer who complained and quit the team, whatever. She didn't like it. Wow. But it's not that the women are just giving up en masse. They're all just giving up. But she believed it. You understand? And so the point is that when you feel like your society and your values are under that kind of threat, okay, then it justifies even picking this sort of, you know, gross strong man if he's going to protect the country and the values.
And bring Little League back to their fields where they belong.
Yeah, make Little League great again. And also, by the way, see the way they engage with him. He says, "Well, if you want to play around the tents," and they'll go, "Ha ha ha," ha. You know.
Well, listen. People have said about Trump, if you hang out with him, he's charming. He tells stories. He tells jokes. It's all about him, and we're watching what that's like. It's very effective. It's just everything he says, almost everything he says isn't true.
But it's almost like, but the way they react to it, it makes it feel like it is true. One of the things that we are worried about and should be worried about, this could be one of the negative effects of the conviction, that if he were ever to gain power again, he's going to be 1,000 times more vindictive and extreme in his revenge. I mean, he's clearly saying he's going to take revenge, but you have to understand from the point of view of the psychology of a malignant narcissist, right? Remember that moment when at the press dinner, when Obama was president and he made fun of Trump? Do you remember that moment? And Trump just looks at it with this look of like hate and daggers like coming from his eye. And he claims that was the moment he made the final decision to run for president, because he'd been insulted, he'd been humiliated, and his reaction is then to fight back. And so he's been insulted and humiliated. He's a wounded animal. And so what you need to understand is, if he were to ever gain power again, the negative reaction that we would be feeling on the other end is the ferocity of his rage. So here, the Fox commentator tries to give him a chance to look presidential and gracious. She tries to ask him, well, you know, are you going to take revenge, or are you going to be a president? But you've said your best revenge would be being a president of all the people. He doesn't take the opportunity to be gracious. Let's hear it.
Mr. President, you've been through a lot.
Yeah.
In your presidency, what they've done to you, you've got the verdict that just came through. A lot of Democrats have expressed concern that if you're elected, you're going to want revenge. And some of your supporters have said, well, you know, mutually, you know, we're just talking about the weaponization of the justice system against political opponents. Some of your supporters have said, well, the only way to stop this is mutually assured destruction, right? If you do it to us, we're going to do it to you. You've said, no, my revenge is going to be success for America. You've just had this verdict.
Yeah.
Do you still feel the same? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a really tough question in one way, because these are bad people. These people are sick. And they do things that are so destructive. I mean, look what they did from the day I got there. And I don't know, you know, a lot of people said we have no choice but to elect Trump. Republicans, because he's the only one that can withstand this. Don't forget, if it weren't me, they'd be going after somebody else. And I know a lot of the competition, they wouldn't do so well. They wouldn't be doing so well right now. They'd be saying, Mommy, take me home. I want to go home. This is brutal. But these are sick people.
So, of course, now he's the victim. These are sick people. And in answer, are you going to take revenge? Well, we'll have to, you know, we'll have to see, because these are sick people. These are bad. I mean, yes, we're going to get them.
And the other people are weak and will have to go home to their mommies.
Right.
And after we learned from Justin 2 weeks ago that Trump's mother was so cold and so unavailable, that's a sign of weakness to want that kind of maternal comfort.
And he always has to be dominant in every story. And so, first of all, he's made himself the victim. Well, no, most people couldn't withstand this, you know, but they'd be running home to mommy because they're not strong like me. So now he's this strong figure. But also, look how she sets him up. Look how the president, you've been through so much.
Yeah, so much sympathy.
You've been through so much. Yeah, yes, he's also done so much.
But when we were to remind our audience, he told lies about the conviction. They asked him not one question about the charges, not one question about the substance. They accepted his story that it's all made up. He did nothing wrong. It's just business records. It's just, that's what he said. It's a part of a ledger, and they just went with it. They just accepted his reality. Yeah. So of course he's a big worried about him.
There's one place where he does try to explain the charges, and see if you can follow this. See if you can follow this. It's a little bit of a challenge. So see this tape.
For instance, the 51 intelligence agents. Who thinks of these? And they think about it just like they say, "I'm guilty of." And you know, all this information was from so many years before the election. You know, it's before the election, so it wasn't like, oh, gee, I won an election. You know, the election just started coming out during the trial. They said, oh, I have an idea. Remember John Lovett's The Liar? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went to Harvard. Yeah. I went. They do that during the trial. Yeah, that's right. It affected the election. This stuff never even came. I never even heard about affecting the election. They're talking about the election of 2016. They're going back.
Masterful.
Masterful. It's so confusing. It's so confusing. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get lost in that maze. And then what are you left with? We've been talking about, I forget who said this, but you quoted it, that Trump is sort of doing stand-up all the time. So after all this meandering and even the election, what's his summary of the trial? It's like John Lovett's. They just said, yeah, it has something to do with the election.
They just stood up and lied, right?
You stood up and told a casual Lovett's like there's no preparation, there's no logic, there's no evidence, there's no witnesses, there's no facts, there's no emails. It's just they just kind of got up there and said, yeah, that's the ticket. You in favor of the election. And you know what? I think you kind of leave that with yeah, that's kind of what they did.
Yeah, no, if you don't think about it too hard. As long as you don't think about it. By the way, it was Bill Maher who said that Donald Trump is doing shtick on stage, that he's like a stand-up. And he's right.
Yeah. So, again, I want to, we're going to do another anti-immigration insane piece. But I just want to keep pointing out, as we did in the last show, this thing about immigrants is serious. That, I've said that Trump is the American Hitler. Some people have pushed back. But I think in this scenario, the immigrants are the new Jews. And I don't believe that he'll build death camps, but I do believe that he'll build concentration camps. And people need to understand concentration camps are when you concentrate an undesirable population in a camp. And he built camps for 250,000 immigrants before the child separation policy came in. So just to let you know, these comments about immigrants are going to have real consequences for real people if he ever gets into power. So let's see his explanation for why crime has dropped in Venezuela.
And Venezuela just reported to 72% that their crime is down 72% in a year. You know why? Because they moved all their criminals into the United States. And the next time we do an interview, we'll do it in Venezuela because it'll be much safer than being in our
Again, charming, people laughing, right? What a ridiculous idea. What a completely idiotic idea that because they've imported all their criminals here en masse, by the hundreds of thousands, okay, their crime rate has dropped by 80%. And again, the people at the Fox are going, oh yeah, They're agreeing with that reality.
Yeah. The percentage Trump uses, he's used this line many times before. It's always a different number. Right. It always is. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right? The other thing, so talking about how they turn things around in immigration. Remember Trump's child separation policy, how we lost all these children. We separated thousands and thousands of children from their families, and then we couldn't find the families again to put the kids back.
Including babies from their mothers.
Mm-hmm.
Babies, infants. It wasn't just
out of their mother's
teenagers or 8-year-olds. It was small babies and really hundreds and hundreds of them.
No, actually, Harry, so you don't realize this. That was a Biden program. You didn't know that was not a Trump program. That was a Biden program.
Oh,
you'll see.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's let the real newscasters fill us in. Can we see the next clip?
So in just this fiscal year 2024, there's been 74,000 unaccompanied children that have come across the border. In 2023, get this number, 137,275. You've seen the images of these children, 5, 7 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old. And the Joe Biden administration has lost 80,000 of them. No one can track, no one knows where they're at.
At least, much more.
At least, there's probably more, but at least. Will the Trump administration commit to finding these children? To finding them and returning them to their families, to their countries, because many of them have been lost into sex trafficking.
Many of them are dead.
It's heartbreaking.
No, it's heartbreaking. It's amazing.
Will you commit to that? Will you commit to finding those children in their
I haven't been asked that question, but the answer is yes. It's a simple answer. Many of them are dead. They have done such a bad job. They have done such a bad job. And, they go under the guise that they're doing this wonderful job of letting people come in. It's also really bad? The caravans. I think I came up with that name a long time, but where you form 25, 30, 40,000 people coming up. The level of abuse and just anger and craziness toward women. Yes. I mean, the caravans, the mothers put their daughters in those caravans, knowing in many cases the daughter's not coming back, knowing for almost certainty that the daughter's going to be raped.
Yes.
They give them large, like bottles of birth control pills to mothers because they know they're going to be raped on the way up all the time.
It's unconscionable.
No, the whole thing is incredible. And Biden thinks he's doing a favor by allowing. And the only reason they have the caravans is because I ended it all. People weren't getting in.
Oh my God. I don't even know how to start to comment on something like this. The caravans were 20 to 30, 40,000 people. Do you remember it was a made up thing where they found like a truck on its way through Mexico?
Well, he claims that I made up the word caravan, by the way. He claims credit for that.
He did. It was a made up thing they did before the first midterm election.
Right.
And it
Another
was
fake invasion.
He always had an invasion coming in before an election or an off year. And then this story that really has all these mothers putting their girls on these caravans, and because they're going to be sex trafficked and raped, and they have birth control pills. So it turns these immigrants into monsters.
Exactly.
That's really the point. It turns them into monsters. And let's remember that the reality is that there were a lot of parents sending children across the border, because if they did under the Biden policy, they would be granted asylum. It was a real problem for Biden because these were people claiming asylum from other countries, and there was a loophole in how the thing was worked out. That's very different from taking babies and children away from their families and losing them. I mean, this created outrage in I guess it was 2018 among Republicans were outraged that this was happening. Yeah. And now it's all been turned into something else.
And so this is why when you go to a party, and you meet a Trump supporter and you say, you want to talk about what they've done wrong. And again, I had this concrete experience on this issue saying, well, okay, look, let's forget about politics. Let's talk about you're a mother. What about childhood separation? I mean, wasn't that how could you? Oh, well, that's nothing compared to the childhood separation Biden's doing. In other words, this stuff is working. And by the way, I just have to make fun of this interviewer because he's making it this crazy claims, right? That they're putting them in caravans to be raped. They'll never see him again. Just giving them birth control. First of all, by the way, you see it making them sound like monsters, right? That they don't care about their own children, right? That they're so heartless towards their own children. It makes them seem subhuman as opposed to seeing them as human figures who are struggling, right, to survive and to better themselves and to escape, then you would sympathize with them, right? But no, they're these callous, kind of people who don't even care about their own children. And while he's saying this, she goes, I know. It's like, you don't know. Just shut up. But you're validating craziness. You're validating horrible lies about immigrants that are making people feel they're invaded.
She's believing everything he says. This is Earth 2. This is a different universe where he's never challenged, where everything he says is true.
I know.
And they just love being in his presence. And folks, you should know this. Fox only released an 11-minute segment and a 7-minute segment on Fox and Friends Saturday, and then a couple of other very short clips. John was able to find a guy on the internet who had the entire hour and a half interview, which if you sit through it is really troubling because he's charming, but he's meandering and he's lying all the time. And it was someone at Fox News squirreled that tape to somebody. Someone was being subversive because that was not released officially by Fox. Oh, they only wanted to show you. And in fact, the 11 minutes are edited. Someone sent me a link. Grateful to all of you, by the way. I think we're having a whole group of psychology interns now who are helping us. But someone actually sent me a version of the 11 minutes, which annotates the cuts because they're chopping it up and making him look more organized than he is.
So this last tape doesn't really relate to psychology per se, but it's one of the things that most disturbs me about Trump and about Trumpism is the total collapse of patriotism, the total surrender of our country to Russia without, even firing a shot, without any resistance. To me, that's almost the worst thing you could do as a leader, is to betray your country to a foreign enemy. And he's been so open about it for 8 years. I just want to play this one little clip about Ukraine. And you tell me who's aiding, abetting, and giving comfort to the enemy.
Said often we wouldn't be in this situation if I were president, but we are now in this situation. If you were president again, how do you deal with Ukraine? How do you deal with Putin?
I think I deal very well with him. We're in a much weaker position because he's winning. I mean, look, we can be nice. I asked Orban, I said, who's winning? If you watch the fake news, you think, well, even they aren't saying it now because the spring offensive never happened. The spring offensive was the opposite, okay? But I said, who's winning? He said, they are. He said, they're a warring nation. They've fought Napoleon. They fought Hitler. Ukraine is a very small country by comparison with far fewer people. They're running out of soldiers, And I would get together. I get along very well with Zelensky because don't forget, he was very honorable with impeachment hoax number one. Hoax. They're all hoaxes. Everything they do is a hoax.
Remember in World War II, Tokyo Rose? She was this Japanese person who just broadcast to the troops, "You're losing, give up, you're losing." He just seems like the Tokyo Rose, of the Ukraine war.
But notice that Viktor Orban told them that they're losing.
Yes, thank you.
Orban, the dictator who's allied with Putin. I mean, what a joke! What a joke!
And what a tell!
And also one reason why Ukraine has been having problems lately is because the Republicans, ordered by Trump, have held up funding to Ukraine for 6 to 8 months when they needed those weapons. However, NATO has been stepping up. France is stepping up. We're now finally, Mike Johnson did something kind of fascinating. He got around Trump and the MAGA crowd and got funding to Ukraine. And they're actually doing rather well. There's no way that they're losing. They're not. It's a horrible thing, and Russia is trying to wear them down. But here's this guy selling them out.
Selling them out. And again, you don't have to be a member of the intelligence community, for him to say, well, I asked Putin's friend who was winning. And he said, Putin is winning. So he's,
everyone knows it. Everyone knows it.
Everyone knows it.
We're all talking about it.
We're all talking about it. So I mean, it's just so blatant. So on the surface, I mean, how much more blatant does it need to be? Well, we have just a couple more clips. I just want to give you the sense of the hero's send-off they gave him at the end of this interview, one day after his conviction. So let's see the next piece of tape.
I want to ask you what Rena in Liberty, Maine asks. By the way, your sleep schedule, your diet, these are things of legend. So she asks, President Trump, what is the very first thing you do every morning?
So I don't sleep a lot. I don't say that as a badge of courage. A lot of people, I don't sleep, and they maybe do. I rarely eat breakfast. It's funny, I love food, but I don't necessarily, I'm too anxious. I really enjoy life. It's crazy. I shouldn't enjoy life. I get indicted, I get impeached. Somebody said, how do you live? The most often question, I get two questions. Number one, I get, will they do it again? You know what that means. Very ominous. I said, they're going to try because they can't help themselves. They're bad. But we hope we're going to have them blocked, okay? The other question is, how do you do it? How do you stand up and you get impeached, you get indicted, you get this, you get convicted of bullshit. And they say, how do you do it?
How do you do it? How does he do it?
It's just amazing. By the way, did you notice they asked him, what do you do in the morning? He didn't really answer. He said, I don't eat breakfast. He then said, I get anxious.
That was
interesting. Then he said, but I enjoy life and everything's fine. But he said the word anxious. He didn't have to say he was anxious.
Now, that was a little bit of a slip. But I love the way they start the question. Well, you're a thing of legend. Let's start there. It's just ridiculous. Okay. Well, it gets worse. It gets worse, folks. Let's see the next clip.
And I know that you've said before that you've been sustained by the prayers of lots of Americans. I've seen pictures of people praying over you.
It's incredible, actually.
Her question is, she says, you've been faced with so much adversity and persecution for years. What's your relationship with God like, and how do you pray? That's Sharon from Alabama.
Okay, so I think it's good. I do very well with the evangelicals. I love the evangelicals. And I have more people saying they pray for me. I can't even believe it. And they are so committed, and they're so believing. They say, sir, you're going to be okay. I pray for you every night. I mean, everybody, almost, I can't say everybody, but almost everybody that sees me, they say it. It's such a beautiful thing. You know what's a beautiful thing, too? When you look at all of this bad stuff going on, they have nothing to look up to. They have no God. They have no anything. They kill people. They beat people. They push people into subways. There's just nothing there. Religion is such a great thing. It keeps you, there's something to be good about. You want to be good. It's so important. And I don't know if it's explained right. I don't know if I'm explaining it right now. But when you have something like that, you want to be good. You want to go to heaven, okay? You want to go to heaven. If you don't have heaven, you almost say, what's the reason? Yeah. Why do I have to be good? Let's not be good. What difference does it make, right? Or they try to create heaven here.
There's so much there.
What is your relationship with God? It's good, and because people pray for me all the time. I think evangelicals love me. He didn't answer the question.
Right.
Doesn't know how to answer the question.
Because he doesn't have a relationship with God. He has no relationship with God, none.
No, of course not. And also, it was a very revealing kind of little riff he went on about why would you be good if you didn't want to get into heaven?
Right, exactly.
This is a guy who cheated on his wife when she was pregnant, not only with a porn star, but with also a year-long affair with a Playboy playmate who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein.
And actually, he's just diagnosed himself as a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
Because we know, right, in our own diagnostic, like normal people don't do bad things because they have a conscience and they feel bad when they do bad things. Psychopaths don't do bad things if they think they're going to get caught and punished. So Trump is saying, well, if there's no heaven, of course, then there'd be no reason not to be bad. He's literally diagnosing himself as a psychopath with that statement.
And then he generalizes to, violence on the subway is
right
because people don't have religion.
Right. So again, this Manichaean sort of black and white split between the good people and the bad people, and so the people who don't have God, we're just pushing people on the tracks for the hell of it, just because we're so angry and godless. So it's again, this very sort of black and white thing. But I mean, also that question, it's like, so from Maine you've been through so much. How has this affected your relationship with God? I mean, no, please. Anyway, so that's Fox. Well, that's bad. But there's something that I think equally bad that's happened. We have our segment, Bad News, Good News. I guess this could have qualified as our bad news. We have another piece of bad news that we really have to report on. Again, as you said, Harry, I want to thank one of our listeners, Bonnie McKinnon, who brought this to my attention. Bonnie McKinn, sorry, who brought this to our attention. So the front page of the Wall Street Journal is an article about Biden's cognitive health. Let's look at the front page. Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. Okay, let's look at that. So let's look at the first paragraph of that. I'm going to read it out loud. When President Biden met with this is the first paragraph. When President Biden met with congressional leaders in the West Wing in January to negotiate a Ukraine funding deal, he spoke so softly at times that some participants struggled to hear him. According to 5 people familiar with the meeting, he read from notes to make obvious points, paused for extended periods, and sometimes closed his eyes for so long that some in the room wondered whether he had tuned out. We had as our first guest, Dr. Vince Greenwood, who did a study of Trump and Biden's cognition. What he did was he actually took my statement that I've been making, in the press, saying that it's a tale of two brains. One, Biden's brain is aging and Trump's brain is dementing. So what he did then is he actually rated speeches they made in middle age and compared them to speeches they've made currently to see if there was any deterioration or change. And what he noticed was that Biden actually was higher than Trump on signs of normal aging.
Absolutely.
For example, speaking more slowly, speaking more quietly. These are signs of normal aging. Whereas Biden he also looked at signs of dementia in their speech. Things like phonemic paraphasias, tangential speaking, confabulation, semantic paraphasias. He had 9 different variables. Biden was 0 on demented symptoms, and Trump was through the roof. Okay, so here is actual scientific experimental proof of the statements we've been making. Well, they're trying to suggest here in the Wall Street Journal, which we know is a corrupt newspaper. It's a Republican newspaper. It's always been right-wing leaning. This is a very cleverly crafted article. I want to really point out the subtle craftsmanship that went into manufacturing this piece of propaganda. Okay, so first of all of the symptoms they mentioned in this first paragraph are symptoms of normal aging. Okay, even closing his eyes. I mean, if I was in a room with Republicans for 3 hours, I think I'd have to close my eyes and tune out a little bit. He wasn't falling asleep the way Trump was falling asleep in court. Okay, he wasn't involuntarily losing consciousness on a regular basis. Okay, he closed his eyes. So I just want to point out that they start there with that little twist. Anecdote. Did you want to say something before we go to the next one?
No. Keep going.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Finishing. So last year, when Biden was negotiating with House Republicans to lift the debt ceiling, his demeanor and command of the details seemed to shift from one day to the next. According to then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and 2 others familiar with the talks, on some days he had loose and spontaneous exchanges with Republicans, and on others he mumbled and appeared to rely on notes. Quote, "I used to meet with him when he was vice president. I'd go to his house," McCarthy said in an interview. "He's not the same person." Okay, so let's take this off the screen and talk about this for a second. He's not the same person. He's not the same person. Well, first of all, by the way, those are the exact words people have been saying about Trump. That this is how they try to, know you're the puppet defense. Okay, because people who worked with Trump in the administration, we've heard from 6 people said he's not the same person he was 4 years ago. Now here we have McCarthy using the exact same words about Biden. Now, what's the difference here? The difference is that all the people that are saying Trump is not the same person he was are his loyalists, are people from his administration, are his friends. Okay, these are people who are on his side, who are saying, really reporting as informants that they're seeing deterioration. And are there any Democrats saying that Biden is deteriorating? No, it's Kevin McCarthy, a pathological liar and psychopath. So why would I listen to him?
Who's on a rehabilitation tour right now? Seriously, this is part of what he's trying to do. It's funny because I don't agree with you, John, that the Wall Street Journal is a corrupt newspaper. There's always been a big difference between the editorial page and the reporters, many of whom are great, but this is really a hatchet job, and it was set up to land, 4 or 5 days after the conviction on purpose.
Exactly.
And I'm not seeing anything in there that suggests that Biden is experiencing anything other than normal aging. And look, it's not ideal that we have either candidate running for president at 78 and 81 years old. But Biden has been really on top of things from every report that I've heard. Even on Morning Joe this morning, Willie Geist, they were really questioning this article. And Willie Geist said, are they kidding? Did they watch the entire interview from this weekend on Fox with Trump? I mean, literally, he was anticipating what we were going to do today, John, which is... Anyway, quite disturbing. So, I think it's a hatchet job, but keep going. What else?
Okay, so before we go to the last slide, I just want to say this one thing about why does this matter? Okay, who reads the Wall Street Journal? Haley voters. the part of the right that are not crazy, right? The people who are, look, they're doctors, they're entrepreneurs, they're top 10%. They don't like taxes. Their family's been Republicans for years. They're not the crazy wing, right? Because they read the Wall Street Journal. They're not they're not necessarily the Fox viewers. These are the upper crust, right? And so the fact that they've had a 1-2 punch, let's have a cupcake interview on Fox, then let's have a hard-hitting article in the Wall Street Journal about how demented Biden is. Okay, it's a 1-2 punch, and it is an attempt to protect him from the fallout of his conviction, which is why we've been saying the Democrats are going to have to scream over and over and over, and they have to bang that drum over and over again, labeling him a felon, putting that scarlet F around his neck, because it won't put itself around his neck. Okay. They are rehabilitating him. Okay. In on Earth too. And if we don't assert the truth about his feloniousness, it will not assert itself. And this is why Biden will make a crucial mistake if he doesn't bang this drum over and over again.
And of course, and what we're pushing too is that the press needs to pay attention to Trump's early onset dementia, because it's there and it's getting worse. So these are sort of two tracks. We have to watch what he's doing according to his malignant narcissism, which is to create a false narrative about invasion and how we need a strong man like him, who's a nice guy after all. But the other track we have to see is, let's keep waiting for him to do stuff at night.
Good point.
Because they keep talking about this debate like it's going to happen, John. And I'm starting to think you're right that it won't. But if it does, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what he does. And notice how the campaign is putting him on in the morning.
Yes, I know. Unfortunately, Harry, you may have saved Trump's campaign, because I think they may have heard you. Well, I'm going to skip the last slide because in the interest of time, and get to our guest. So I'd like to introduce you to Dr. John Talmadge. He's a graduate of Dartmouth University and Duke Medical School, and he's a former clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Texas. And he has the distinction of having been one of the first people to have written about Trump's dementia. It wasn't a very widely read paper. In fact, we had trouble finding it online. But he did write in 2015 that Trump really was a combination of demented and malignant narcissism, which is actually quite prescient, because that's basically the model you and I are working on now here in 2024. But before we get to your paper, Dr. Talmadge, I wanted to ask, because I know you've been listening, you and I discussed the Wall Street Journal article earlier this morning. I just wanted to give you a chance to weigh in on that article.
I can't disagree with anything that you said. And by the way, I really appreciate your inviting me here. You can imagine over the last nearly 10 years, I haven't been able to have this conversation very often. You and I and a few others are really a minority here. And that's a different conversation about the duty psychiatry has and psychology has to protect psychiatry from dangerous situations. The article surprised me in terms of content, but it didn't surprise me in terms of its coming out with the timing you described. A hit piece designed to really project onto Biden kinds of problems that Trump has been exhibiting, at least for a decade that I've been watching him painfully at times. I've seen every rally, every long speech. I can talk some more about that. I wouldn't have a lot to add, except I read the Wall Street Journal. I don't think it's a corrupt enterprise. I'll go on record saying that. But every once in a while, just like the New York Times, they'll go off the rails. And they sure did on that article.
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to quote some things from your 2015 prescient paper. I mentioned so first of all, you made a point that we've been making. Trump's dementia is generally overlooked because of the florid, colorful, and newsworthy nature of his malignant narcissism. We've talked about that his malignant narcissism is also the best camouflage for his dementia, because some of the crazy, inappropriate, disruptive things he does, we don't know whether to attribute them to his personality or his cognitive decline.
Absolutely right. It didn't take long for me to see that, because with my background, which is brain science and psychiatry and neurology and all that, I was struck very quickly by by his language, his inability to handle complex ideas, his difficulty adapting to novel situations, the fact that he doesn't talk with people, he talks at people, which is called compensating for your deficits. If I dominate the conversation and I'm constantly coming at you, paying little attention to what you're saying or asking, I control what's going on, and so my deficits, my inability to think straight, is better concealed. That's very common in brain disorders. Very sad as well.
So I want to talk more specifically some of the things that you wrote about. You said Trump loses his train of thought. He drifts, wanders, and rambles. I have tweeted at least 100 examples, we didn't go into your tweets, of what I call calf splatter. It's a new technical term, calf splatter.
That's Texas.
Oh, it's a technical Texas term, I understand. His tendency to go in all directions, babbling stuff that can't stand up to scrutiny. This is a significant symptom of brain disease. Did you want to elaborate on that?
I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
One of the striking things that I began to notice back in 2016, I guess it was how little attention was being paid to that aspect of his presentation. And the other was I reached a point after just a few months, maybe 3 or 4 months, where I wondered, was it always like this? So I went back and I found his interviews with Rona Barrett, Charlie Rose, David Letterman, a couple of others. There were long interviews, especially Barrett and Rose. And he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he spoke in complete sentences. His vocabulary wasn't that of a 4th grader. He used words. I wrote some of them down. I don't think that really matters, but that comparison, frankly, just almost made my head explode. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because it's like a panoramic or landscape of where he has come from, what has happened, and how he is now. And people go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but people need to understand that one of the ways that doctors diagnose dementia is comparing people to their own baseline. Right?
Absolutely.
That's why you went back and looked at those speeches. If he always spoke at a 4th grade level, he might just be a 4th grade dropout. I mean, so what? But the point is, I understand why you were reaching to give us some examples of his high vocabulary, all these SAT words that he sprinkled into his speech in ordinary times. If you can go from an Ivy League vocabulary to a 4th grade vocabulary, that's such a precipitous drop that it suggests that there's an organic brain disorder taking place, right? Am I correct?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, good. So one of the other things you said, you singled out 4 of the most significant symptoms. You said Trump's brain dysfunction and his evolving dementia, prevarication. Well, of course, he always did that. Confabulation, perseveration, and loss of language fluency or richness of vocabulary. We've already spoken to some of these, like the loss of language fluency. Could you say a little about perseveration and confabulation?
Yeah, these are concepts. These are big words that we use sometimes bigger words than we need to in clinical work. Confabulation means just making stuff up. It's another way to defend oneself and to compensate for one's deficits. So you might be sitting with somebody, and this is when he tells his sir stories. I don't know if I coined that phrase, but I started commenting on sir stories because I'd watch all of the rally. And at some point, he would say, well, the generals came in to see me, and they said, sir. And then there would be some tall tale, absolute fantasy.
It's a good tale.
Completely ignorant of any facts, and very often misrepresenting in a dangerous way what our world situation and our national situation is. So that's one part of it. And then prevarication is just intentionally not telling the truth.
Right.
Just like he's done this week, I don't know, 24 times that I could annotate. Not BS, but just frank lying.
Oh, terrible. The other phrase, a term we were asking about was perseveration.
Oh, yeah.
You see him doing that as well?
Yeah. Some of my colleagues who might even agree with us about the severity of his brain dysfunction might take issue with that. But what perseveration means is repeating yourself. And in the most serious cases, it even comes down to repeating a sentence that the individual has just said. I think the fact that he circles back and goes over the same ground again and again and again in a rally speech and an interview indicates that he's perseverating, because he doesn't have anything else to say. So he says what he's already said, which is what people with dementia will tend to do.
Russia.
Yeah. And all of his, I made a list and then I left it in the kitchen or something, but the words that show up, in fact, that's been analyzed. Someone analyzed the frequency of word use, words like disgrace, evil. Yeah, I'm having a senior moment myself. But he just circles back these very simple words and phrases that very often are completely unrelated to what's going on in the dialogue, because there isn't a dialogue. It's all monologue. He's like a radio, and then you have a listener here, but he's just constantly broadcasting. He's never receiving.
Yes, that's exactly right. And in fact, we even have a clip of him getting lost and then saying, "I always come back. It's genius." So he actually
I mentioned John Lovett. That reminds me of acting.
So I have one last question. I don't know, Harry, if you do, but one last question. What kind of response did you get from your colleagues when you published this paper?
It's been mixed or not at all, I would say. Although if you just looked at my Twitter business, you would think that a lot of people are paying attention, and I don't think that's really true. Here's the subtle thing, though, that's not discussed often enough, and this is the reason I got into this. An old guy like me, retired, former professor, I know how my life turns out, and slings and arrows aren't going to cost me anything. Well, maybe, but that was a risk I was willing to take. Somebody who's 40 years old or mid-career, even in their 50s, who incurs the wrath that we've seen on this crazy right, not to mention the wrath from Trump himself, is taking big risk. I mean, it really could damage not only your career but your prospects for recovering from whatever they might do. And I thought, and I said on Twitter, among other places, it's up to us to speak up, because we know how this turns out. Trump and Clinton and I are the same age, basically. We were born within 3 or 4 months of each other. So I think folks my age really need to take a stand and really need to share the wisdom and the knowledge that we have, limited though it may be, because we've got a real stake in this. It's really a serious game we're playing.
Well, it's not accidental that a lot of our guests are retired professors of psychiatry.
That's right.
That's not accidental, because I've had several current professors of psychiatry refuse to speak out because they either fear persecution or repercussions, or they've experienced repercussions. One person told me he was denied a promotion for his anti-Trump statements. So, what you're sort of saying is, hey, there's nothing left they can do to me. But for the people who still have something to lose, who are starting their careers, they're afraid, and they have reason to be afraid.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, John, I just also want to tell you that I really appreciate your directness and the way you talk about this issue, and also about what our responsibility is. as teachers, as clinicians, as citizens. It's so important. And I really appreciate what you've done.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, John. And thanks for telling the truth to the people.
Great to be with you guys. I hope we'll have a chance to talk again.
Absolutely.
Me too. I'm sure we will. Well, so we've gotten to the shrink wrap portion of our show. Harry, what have we learned today?
Well, we keep adding to our understanding, not only of Trump's internal issues, which have to do with holding off a collapse from a sense of not being great, his need for to puff himself up with accomplishments in which he will lie and cheat and do whatever he needs to do. And we were keeping track of the ways in which his brain is starting to fail, you know, with propulsion, we could say. And we started last time to talk about the ways in which he impacts his audiences. And I think that the interview that we saw with the B team from Fox and Friends Saturday it shows that he creates a narrative of an heroic narrative starring himself.
He's been through so much.
All he's done is great things. He's only tried to help everyone. He doesn't even need to run for president again. And it's an honor to be convicted of 34 felony counts.
Right.
And especially in an interview where no one asks him any questions about it, challenges him in any way. But that is creating a kind of community experience for Trump followers. And it's extremely dangerous.
You know, there is a genius to what I'm doing. You do know that I go from here to there, and it all comes back into a beautiful picture.
Thanks. Yep, that was great.
Well, Harry,
John,
I just feel like you've been through so much. You've been through so much.
I know.
How do you? I just have one question before we. How do you do it? How do you get up in the morning? So much persecution.
I don't have breakfast. I get really anxious, and then I'm happy because my life is great.
That's good. I know. Yeah. Well, that was our report from Earth 2. We'll be back next week on Earth 1 with another episode of Shrinking Trump.
Yes. Be sure to tell your friends about us. Looking forward to seeing you next time.
Bye-bye.